But here we are, filled to the brim with Canadiens content in the aftermath of the trade deadline coming and going. Before we get into the nitty-gritty, Marco, good to see you, brother. What your quick reaction now that the dust has settled and the NHL trade deadline has come and gone and the team has played games?
This core got you to this point. Let's see if this core can get you over the hump. And if not, you get that information. Like you're basically playing on house money at this point for the Montreal Canadiens, because you, by all intents and purposes, were not expected to be here. I think the very optimistic fans may have thought, but smart money did not have the Canadiens in the position that they are now. And I think that's a fair statement to make. So you're on house money. This is invaluable experience that this core is getting, because let's face it, Nick Suzuki and Cole Caulfield themselves have never really truly been in a playoff race, because 2019 the season ended abruptly and then they went into a play-in, right? Because of 2019, 2020, and then 2020, 2021, the Canadiens made the playoffs by default because the Canadian division was so terrible. In a normal setting, they wouldn't even have made the playoffs because of the point structure. So the way that I see it is, this is valuable for them because this is what a playoff push looks like. And the moment that a guy like Jake Evans was signed to the friendly contract that he signed, I think all bets were off. I think at that point, right, what are we really, is the second round pick that you're going to get today as valuable for Jake Evans, as valuable as potentially the second round pick that you could probably get for him 2 years down the line, if at that point guys like Alex Newhook, Oliver Kapanen, Owen Beck, etc., and Michael Hage managed to supplant him and make him expendable. At that point, you could trade him. So, like, the Canadiens didn't really lose any value. They just kicked it longer down the road, giving them that flexibility since there's no trade protection. So, Canadiens standing pat, it was predictable. It was probably the right choice, unless, people are that impulsive to see them make the playoffs.
Right.
I'm not
so,
one of those.
Well, when you brought up, where they are now, remember last season, the team finished with 76 points. Mm-hmm. Vegas generally knows what they're doing. The Vegas odds makers put out a season projected point total for this year at 76.5 points. Yeah. So the Canadiens, as we speak, right, are going to sail past that 76.5 point threshold, which takes me to something you wrote midweek last week as it relates to what the Canadiens did. And we're talking obviously and getting Marco's final take on the deadline, right? And NHL sources have indicated to RG that the buyer's market was simply too rich for any serious general manager to throw themselves into. And clearly the Montreal Canadiens aren't in the conversation of let's go acquire rentals, let's give up first round picks. This is not Julien Brisebois' Montreal Canadiens. He's in a different category. Ken Hughes is in his own category. What else did you find out as it relates to the trade deadline compared to the summer months? These are two different things in general managers' approach to the deadline and the summer in two different ways, Marco. What have some people said to you about that?
I think there were a lot of bubble teams that wanted to improve that simply just looked at the prices and said, hell no. And you're looking at a team like Utah, for example, that was like in it. Unfortunately lost recently, but they're slowly kind of out of it now. You're looking at, Montreal was looking into buying in a serious way. The Columbus Blue Jackets were considering buying, but they didn't want to move any of their first round picks. So what really are you going to do at this point? There was a lot of there were a lot of bubble teams really trying. The Vancouver Canucks tried to make moves that just simply didn't pan out. The Calgary Flames tried to improve and that just didn't work. So there were a lot of teams because it just didn't make sense. There's a lot of, especially in the Western Conference. The Western Conference is an absolute dichotomy of excellence and disaster zone when you look at the two, right? Because there's just such a divide between the bottom five of the Western Conference and the other 10 teams. The Eastern Conference is the exact opposite, where there's like 8 teams basically between the first wildcard spot and like 10th to last in the NHL, which is currently being held by the Boston Bruins, who are 1 point behind the Montreal Canadiens. That's how tight that spectrum is. So
crazy.
It made no sense to start throwing first round picks or prospects for those teams. But what does that do? Not only does that limit the amount of sellers that you would historically see, but it drove the price up because there were very few options for buyers on the market, right? And that is, I think, where you kind of see, unless you're the Buffalo Sabres, and the Dylan Cousins trade is a conundrum in and of itself. But if you look at, for example, the Colorado-New York Islanders trade for Brock Nelson, where the New York Islanders were able to secure a first-round pick and Cal Ritchie, who, in my opinion, is probably a top 15, top 20 prospect in the NHL, for a rental center who not necessarily having the best season and is already like 33. There was a sense of desperation after the news that Dallas was going after Rantanen. And I think that's what kind of flushed things. But if Brock Nelson netted a first and an absolute stud of a top prospect, the Canadiens had no chance of keeping up.
And listen, my understanding was, like, on the French side, Matthias Brunet brought this up on French radio last week. And again, it's him and his sources, and he's comfortable going on the radio and talking about it. So I'm comfortable asking you. The Canadiens kicked tires, according to Matthias Brunet, on Dylan Cousins, and Kevin Adams was like, I want Cole Caulfield or I want Juraj Slafkovsky. You want Dylan Cousins? That's who I want.
They wanted a top 6 player. Yes.
And I don't need to ask you if you would have executed on that deal. I'm 99.999% sure I know what your answer is, because it's the same as mine. No freaking way. So isn't that the lesson, though, at the end of the day? That if you want, whether it's Dylan Cousins or someone like him, man, how are you going to get him? You got to give to get.
Right. But there's a difference between their initial ask and what it eventually becomes. Because a team like that asked for a Cole Caulfield or Juraj Slafkovsky, both have more points than Cousins. Both have more impactful than Cousins right now. So there's that. A. B. What they ended up trading Cousins for is grossly inferior in terms of overall package value to the value of Cole Caulfield and Nick Suzuki. So they clearly had to.
Yeah, agreed.
They clearly had to take an inferior package. So they started high, and obviously, people, Kevin Adams is a smart man. He started talking to people in the media, tried to get a little bit of momentum going for Dylan Cousins, but ultimately they had to trade Dylan Cousins and a second to get who? Josh Norris, who he's a good top 6 center, but he's just not healthy enough to be a dependable, in my opinion,
he's hurt already
for a contending team. And he's hurt already. Which, was the most predictable thing that was going to happen. And I think Dylan Cousins is going to be a very serviceable top 6 center for the Ottawa Senators. And he brings that size and that work ethic that they like. He may not be a 65 points, 70 point center like he was in that one season in Buffalo. But even if he's a 60 point center, with the way the cap is rising and his two-way play, that's still good. And considering what they gave up, they basically swapped out 2 centers. There's obviously other pieces here, but they went and got a guy that's more durable, more dependable, and has a stronger two-way game. So I'm okay with that when you have Tim Stützle, who's basically a 90-point to 100-point center on a good day for the Ottawa Senators in their number 1 slot. You could afford to have a guy like Dylan Cousins at number 2. So you look at that kind of a situation. Where I was told to watch out is there are a lot of teams that could consider shuffling this summer. I'll give an example. One team that I was told to watch out for in the summer are the Seattle Kraken.
Yeah.
And so when you look at the Seattle Kraken, Montreal just played them. They outplayed Montreal in one specific area down the middle.
Exactly.
And the reason for that is because they are littered with centers. Chandler Stevenson, Matty Beniers, not having the best season, granted, but still a good two-way player. A lot of speed. Shane Wright. They're playing Jared McCann on the wing because they simply have no other room. They traded Yanni Gourde, who himself was, a pretty substantial piece for them at center. So again, you're seeing this is a team that has Berkeley Catton likely coming to the NHL next season, who's also a center. And so, I spoke to him last year. He views himself as a center in the NHL, and I don't think that Seattle would have drafted him at 8th overall, considering what was available on defense, if they didn't think that he was going to be a center at the next level. So they've got too many centers. It's a worthwhile conversation. That's a team that's going to have a conversation because they don't have a lot. They have some, but they don't have a lot coming in the form of defensemen the young defensemen. And again, from the way that they went about selling off pieces and getting 2 first-round picks from Tampa Bay, they're a team that is still in that process of getting assets, because unfortunately they didn't have the expansion draft that the Vegas Golden Knights did. Not the same concept, not the same timeline. It's completely understandable. Teams were a little bit more prepared this time around, but they are in a position where they made that playoff push about 1 year, and now they need to renew assets so that they can continue to add via free agency, because they are a no-tax state in Washington, and then add the young players that you can bring into the club to further supplement. So they're a team that I think, you could watch out for. Utah is a team I think you can watch out for, especially with a guy like Nick Schmaltz. There are a couple teams to watch out for.
That's Marco D'Amico, just the best. Love having you're my favorite. You're my best asset, brother. Marco D'Amico at MN D'Amico. Well, you didn't like that? Is that too much?
I know.
Too much?
No. I just don't throw the franchise tag too soon.
No, not the NFL. I don't want to franchise. I want to reward you. I don't want to franchise tag you. I want you to be welcome. I want you to love being here. Marco D'Amico, I love having you. Check him out at MN D'Amico. Follow him on all your favorite socials. Check him out on rg.org. Marco, we'll see you soon. Thanks, brother.
Sounds like a plan.